Hello, Giants fans. Thank you for watching the Giants Alliance channel. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Lance Medow. He's from Giants Radio. He does the pregame, the postgame, halftime show. He also does some Giants podcasts. Big Blue Kickoff is on every day at 12 o'clock. And I feel very lucky to have you on my show. I really appreciate it. And I just want to ask how you're doing today.
I'm doing very well, David. First of all, it's my pleasure to be on your program. Thanks so much for inviting me, and looking forward to talking Giants football as well as the NFL overall.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on my show. It's really exciting. This is the first time I've ever wrote questions out ahead of time because I am excited about this interview, and I listen to you so much on the radio, so it's kind of cool to talk to you in person. My first question, I wanted to ask a little bit about your background, so I have a two-part question. Did you grow up as a Giants fan? And then when you got into broadcasting, was it always your goal to sort of work with the Giants or work closely with a pro sports team?
Well, I grew up as a big-time sports fan, I think is the best way to classify myself, David. I mean, basketball was always my first love. Whenever anybody asked me the question about broadcasting and sports, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I was a huge basketball fan. I grew up playing the sport. So that was always my first tie-in to sports. My dad and Knicks season ticket holder for many years during my childhood. Even to this day, we would bond through that. So, basketball was a big part of my background and my upbringing. I certainly love football. There's no doubt about it. I was more of an NFL fan, I would say. I think that's a better way to classify me. And as far as getting into broadcasting, given the fact that I loved all sports, I was certainly just looking for any path to combine both forces, whether it be basketball and broadcasting, football and broadcasting, baseball, you name it. And certainly was fortunate enough for the door to open to get involved with the New York Giants. And, very thankful that my role has grown over the course of the years. You mentioned now, with the Giants Radio Network, doing podcasts, doing on-air work in terms of their shows. So, the fact that I've been able to contribute in various aspects certainly was a great opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it is awesome that you're able to do basketball as well. It's like you do the play-by-play for Columbia and the Ivy League, yeah, and other stuff on Sirius Radio with the NBA and the NFL. So that's awesome. I think that's so cool because I'm just so into sports, not just the Giants, the NBA and baseball as well. So I wanted to ask you about some early Giants, or to me, I guess it's early. Because I grew up as such a big Giants fan, and in 2002 is when I started getting really into the Giants. They had Jeremy Shockey, who was my favorite player back then, but Amani Toomer, Tiki Barber, Ike Hilliard, Kerry Collins, I think was playing really well, yeah, at that time. So it was a really tough loss for me when we lost to San Francisco, and we all know what happened with the comeback, yeah, and the field goal. But I wanted to get your perspective on that team because I thought we were playing so well. I think we might have had a chance to beat Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay ended up winning the Super Bowl that year. So I wanted to get your perspective. Do you think we actually had a chance if we did get through that San Francisco game to go really far? Or do you think Tampa Bay was such a good defense that it would have been really tough for us?
Well, you're right. Tampa Bay had probably one of the best defenses in the NFL during that era because if people remember, David, they absolutely crushed the Raiders in that Super Bowl. And yeah, that was an extremely talented Raiders team, which was led by Rich Gannon and had a lot of offensive weapons around him. So it just goes to show you, as great as your offense is, and the Giants did have a really good offense. Remember, they built that massive lead on San Francisco, as you just noted. It was Jeremy Shockey. It was everybody having a hand in that. And it's funny you bring up Kerry Collins, not to get off topic, David, but when I'm always asked about one of the most valuable free agent signings in Giants history, I actually always come up with Kerry Collins' name. I think he's one of the most overlooked additions within the Giants franchise because think about the bridge he built before the Giants eventually got to Eli Manning. He provided stability, and people forget, Kerry Collins, remember, when he parted ways with Carolina, he had off-the-field issues. Nobody thought he was really ever going to get another opportunity, and all of a sudden the Giants bring him in, and he flourished, and he helped them ultimately get to a Super Bowl. So I think he's extremely valuable. I think when you take into consideration the talent, getting back to your question with respect to that year's team, certainly I think the Giants are more than capable of getting to the Super Bowl. But, here's where I think you got to look at it from the big picture perspective. And this is even relating to today's NFL. How many times have we seen great teams on paper who could score with the best of them? And, hey, you get to a random Sunday and things just don't click. So, I personally would always say I'd rather have defense as my identity. I'd rather have defense as my strength. And I think the Giants' defense was certainly respectable and solid for that team. I would not put them up there, of course, with the manpower that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were working with. But with the way that offense was clicking going up against San Francisco, hey, if the cards fell into place, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Giants could have absolutely gone to the Super Bowl. No doubt about it.
Yeah, that was a really tough loss for me. Like I'm a big Yankees fan, so I lived through like the 2004 playoff collapse to the Red Sox. But for whatever reason, that playoff loss was like the most hurtful playoff sports moment of my sports fandom. But yeah, I love what you said about Kerry Collins, and that was actually my next question I had prepared for you because I heard that Wellington Mara was like a big fan of Collins. And there was like a reluctance to even want to go in the direction of Eli Manning because, I mean, I agree. I think Collins was actually a very good player for us. And he had a pretty good year with Tennessee as well, where they had a really good season with him, like after he left the Giants. He had an awesome arm. Like he was a good player, I thought. So my next question was, do you think if the Giants never drafted Eli Manning and we stayed with Collins, do you think we could have won another Super Bowl? And then how did you feel when we ended up going in the direction of Eli Manning? Like, were you excited, or did you think like maybe we should have kept with Collins back then in 2004? Obviously, it was the right choice, but how did you feel at the time?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think the other name, David, that we have to enter in this conversation, remember, is Kurt Warner. Because remember, Warner comes in between Collins and Eli Manning. They wound up parting ways with Collins. Kurt comes in, and then he was serving as the mentor for Eli Manning. So if we go down your hypothetical road, I would think it would be more of if they stick with Kurt Warner perhaps a little bit longer, then perhaps move on to Eli Manning. And Kurt, by then, was an established veteran who had a great deal of success with the greatest show on turf, the Rams. And people forget, this is another conversation about perspective, David. It's funny, as we're going through Giants history, I always bring this up. Eli was handed over the reins, and the Giants had a winning record, okay? Whenever we talk about rookie quarterbacks and when is the appropriate time, right, for them to take over, and we were having this conversation with Daniel Jones last year, and I remember everybody was asking, well, when do you think Daniel Jones could make his debut? So I said, well, a lot is going to depend on how the team performs, right, where the team is. And if you were to ask me, would he have gotten in 3 games into the season? No. I still, to this day, tell you I never thought that would have happened. And even though the Giants lost their first 2 games, it wasn't as if the offense wasn't somewhat productive or there weren't maybe some signs of hope there. But, hey, the coaching staff, Pat Shurmur, felt they wanted to go in that direction. So if Kurt Warner remains at quarterback, to your point, David, who's to say that the Giants perhaps don't stay in playoff contention that year? I don't think that's crazy. And look at what Warner went on to do with Arizona, okay? Yeah. Let's not discredit him, right? In terms of getting the Cardinals to a Super Bowl, talking about heartbreaking losses, what about the loss they suffered to the Pittsburgh Steelers? I mean, we could really bring in every fan base that has suffered immensely, as you were reminiscing about the Giants' loss to the Niners. So, I don't think necessarily the Giants would have been doomed had they not gone in the direction of Eli Manning. But honestly, if they didn't go with Eli Manning, I think they probably would have brought in another young quarterback, whether it would have been holding on to Phillip Rivers, whether it would have been pursuing Ben Roethlisberger. So I would say probably in all likelihood, one of those 3 was going to wind up with the Giants, David, mainly because even though Kurt Warner had the Giants playing respectable football, I don't think he was in their long-term plan. So I think one way or another, they were probably going to wind up with one of those 3 names out of the 2004 draft class. Now, could they have stuck with Kerry Collins a little bit longer? Because in fairness to your point, the reason why they moved on from Kerry Collins is they were preparing, obviously, for a younger quarterback and felt Kurt Warner could provide that bridge. If Kerry Collins helped them get to a Super Bowl, and as we're talking about with the 2003 playoffs, if Kerry Collins was continually provided with the necessary talent around him, I don't see any reason why the Giants would have not had continued success. Would it have been long-term, David? I don't know about that. I certainly wouldn't have gone that far, but I don't see why they couldn't have had still a continuous window where they still would have been playing productive football.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because like I think Collins was that good, and like I said before, like he had a really good year with Tennessee a little bit later, and he made the Super Bowl like against the Ravens in 2000. He didn't play well in that game, but that defense was
But
just so
still, the
good.
path to get there can't be overlooked, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the point you made about Kurt Warner too, because we were winning when Eli took. We had a winning record when Eli took over,
Yeah.
and yeah, I used to go to Giants training camp every summer, and Kurt Warner was just like the nicest guy. He spent so much time with the fans, so I'm sure like. This is a question I didn't have planned, but I'm just curious about this. Like, which of the players, because you're around the team a lot, like, would you say surprisingly is just like such a nice guy? Because I was so surprised. Kurt Warner is a former MVP. He's a Hall of Fame player, and he was just so nice, like talking to the fans, and he spent so much time signing autographs. And I just remember that as like a teenager. And it meant a lot to me. Like I still have his ball like in this office here. Because I've always liked Kurt Warner, and I did root for him really bad in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, they barely lost. But yeah, I guess my question is like, which player were you surprised was like very outgoing and nice, like kind of like Kurt Warner was? I don't know if that's a good question, but
Well, I think it's a tough question to really go through the history of me being around the team, and if there's anybody that surprised me. See, when I go into the locker room and interact with players and listen to them talk, I guess, and this is more of my big picture perspective, David, of athletes in general, I never, even when I was a kid, never put athletes on a pedestal. I would say the one guy that I would argue would maybe put me in awe, and if I would get a little bit nervous being around them or maybe struggle with words, would be Michael Jordan, because growing up, like I said, basketball was my first love, and to this day, diehard Jordan fan, and I will defend him till the nth degree. So that's really the only guy, in fairness, David, that I would put in a separate category. Everybody else, whether it's a team I've covered, whether it's just from a fan perspective, never put athletes anywhere above and beyond where I look at them as these godlike figures or individuals that are above and beyond. I'm entertained by them, right? It's sports entertainment at the end of the day. So I would say I have a very unique perspective maybe compared to other fans and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is I never go in prejudging them and saying, boy, based on what I've seen on the field, this guy is going to come off as, a narcissist or somebody that, doesn't want to interact. I would say I can't remember being in a locker room setting, at least with the Giants, because that's what we're talking about right now, where I was turned off by a player or I was really caught off guard in terms of how short they were, how they weren't welcoming, and they didn't want to either have a conversation or do an interview. I would say, for the most part, my experience has been extremely positive. Even the guys that have come back and, for our pregame show, who we bring out on our stage and do some interviews, and everybody's been extremely forthcoming and giving with their time. So, it'd be hard once again to classify somebody and say, wow, I went in thinking I wasn't going to get anything out of this guy, and all of a sudden he welcomed me with open arms. I will say this. I'll give you this in fairness, Dave. And once again, I'm not trying to circumvent answering your question. It's just I don't want to make up something, because then that would not be an honest answer. I will say this. A guy like Michael Thomas, who just signed with the Houston Texans, always had a great deal of respect for him. I think he's an extremely well-respected individual in the locker room. And the stuff he does in the community and how he handles the media and how he interacts with teammates, I think is 100% honest. He does not put on a facade. I don't think he comes off as an individual that's just trying to put on a dog and pony show. Because you know how sometimes athletes are very good. They give you this persona in the public view, but then behind closed doors, they certainly don't come off as that. So Michael Thomas is somebody that comes to mind. I've done interviews with him. Very down-to-earth guy. That honestly, if he walked down the street, you probably would not even recognize him as an NFL player because, let's face it, he's not a big name, but one of the most down-to-earth individuals that I've had the pleasure of interacting with. So I want to mention somebody like that because I think those are the players that deserve a lot of attention as opposed to, maybe guys that celebrate a lot on the field, turns off the fans, and then they turn out to be really good guys. Nobody necessarily comes or jumps off the page to me because, like I said, for the most part, I would say I'm fortunate where I've had a lot of positive experiences around the players.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so cool to me to be able to like speak to all those players and just see them. And yeah, I still look up to them, even though I'm like 32 at this point. But I look up to these
An
guys, and
investment in these players, so there's nothing wrong with that. You know, fans, people that cover the team, you invest so much time in these players.
yeah,
It's understandable.
yeah, and like when I really started getting into the Giants was around 2002, and then I would go to Giants training camp every summer. I saw like when Eli was a rookie and Kurt Warner was obviously there too. And that was also the first year of Tom Coughlin. So I wanted to ask you a question about him because obviously he was such a good coach. He got the most out of his players. He was also a good coach at Jacksonville. So I do want to ask you a little bit about the current team, but what do you think made Tom Coughlin like such a good coach? Because obviously we haven't been good since he left. We had that one good year in 2016, but we haven't had prolonged success. And I feel like when he was here, especially in the beginning, we were just consistently good every single year. We would, make the playoffs more often than not. So what do you think make Tom Coughlin such like a good head coach?
Well, I would agree with your synopsis in terms of, you're right, it was just that one 2016 season. And I think based on how the Giants have had their fair share of ups and downs, David, to your point, since Coughlin left, perhaps puts him in greater light in terms of even some of the rough years that he was with the Giants. What he was able to get out of this franchise and this team, I think says a lot about his abilities. I think what set Tom Coughlin aside from the rest of the pack is his ability to earn and demand the respect of his players, David. That, I think, put him in a league of his own. And remember, this is an individual that, and this is well documented, so I'm not telling any of your viewers anything that they haven't heard before. When he first came in, he did not have that likability factor where players were attracted to what he was selling. He had to adjust as an individual, and it's very difficult for a guy like Tom Coughlin. Just think about this. 2004, by the time he arrives at the Giants, think about how lengthy of a coaching career he's had by then. You mentioned Jacksonville, but we're talking about a guy that was at Boston College. We're talking about an individual that was an assistant with the Giants. So, the old phrase in life is it's hard to change who you are that late in life, right? Because you've been through the rope so many times and through the logistics and so forth that, you are who you are. And for Coughlin to change and still get so much out of his players and then to slowly be attracted to what he was selling, as I mentioned, and wanting to listen to what he has to say and build very close bonds in relationship with his players, that to me is what made him extremely impressive. Number two, Coughlin wasn't a play caller. And that also, I think, makes him extremely unique because what is the trend today, David, in the NFL? You have a lot of head coaches / play callers, right? Either they're defensive coordinators or they're offensive coordinators, and they want to do everything simultaneous. And once again, I'm not saying that it can't be done. There are a lot of great coaches that have been able to do both of those chores and do it very well. But I like the idea of a CEO. And I think Coughlin took on the persona of a CEO, which is I'm going to surround myself with great individuals and I'm going to designate roles. And he did that, even though he's had a variety of offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. And Coughlin knew, okay, I know when to step in. And I know when also to take a step back and allow my assistants to do their thing. So that is what I also think set him apart. Thirdly, I think he also slowly empowered his players because one of the things, if you remember, that Coughlin introduced that was not necessarily widely adopted was he made a group of players serve as a conduit between the rest of the team and himself. So what he would do is he'd have conversations each week with this council that he put together. And if there were any concerns in the locker room, they would be, once again, the middlemen to direct that towards Coughlin's attention if he wasn't necessarily on top of it on the day-to-day things that he had to take care of. So those are three things that I think right there should be noted compared to perhaps what other coaches have done either within the Giants organization or elsewhere. And also motivation. I think Coughlin knew how to push the right buttons. I think he knew when to be serious, David. I think he knew when to be playful. And I think he always had a good read of the tone of the team. Because the one thing that you could say about the Coughlin era, even when the team wasn't necessarily great, the team played hard. And that to me is a sign of a good coach. And the other thing that I'll throw out, and this is just my personal opinion, as a fan of sarcasm, nobody played the game of sarcasm better than Tom Coughlin, because for anybody that was around him when he interacted with the media, he kept it entertaining because he knew when to push the buttons of the media. And no disrespect to any Giants coach that has since followed Tom Coughlin, but there's no competition, David. Nobody's come close. So I always appreciated his sarcasm, and I'm glad that he kept that alive and well.
Yeah, I actually love listening to like the sights and sounds when like the coaches are mic'd up, and I've listened to him at practice. Like he gets on the players about their equipment and stuff, and he was like very detail oriented. But he was such a good coach, and I think you made a really good point too about like he had such a long coaching career before he got to the Giants, like with Jacksonville, but also like an assistant with Parcells and in Boston College. So I think that helped him a lot because like the players did respect him. He had the track record. And he deserves so much credit for doing in 2007 what you said, where he has the committee of players that would like, be a bridge between the coaches and the players. And he changed so much and had to have like a lot of success and then finally change, when you're like much older. I feel like he definitely deserves a lot of credit for that, because obviously we won the Super Bowl when he did that. And then we won another one in 2011. So actually my next question is kind of related to this. Which of the two Super Bowl teams, and this is kind of another hypothetical question, so I hope it's okay, but I just think it's interesting. Like the 2007 team was awesome. We had the awesome defense. Strahan was still on the team. He was still really good in his last season. Obviously, Justin Tuck was pretty young back then, and OC was in his prime. But then the 2011 team, I think Eli was much better in 2011 than he was in 2007. He was just, I don't think he deserved MVP, but I think he should have been like in the consideration and the conversation because he had a really good year in 2011. So if those teams were able to hypothetically play each other, who would you say is going to win that game? I know it's a crazy kind of question, but it's just, those are the two teams that obviously brought me the most joy as a Giants fan. I'm too young to remember like the Buffalo Super Bowl when we beat them. I was alive during it, but I obviously don't remember. So, yeah, I guess my question is, like, which of those teams, if they were able to play each other, I know it's not a possibility at all, but which of those teams do you think would be better? Because they're kind of similar, but...
Remember, you have some overlap, too. So who are we going to assign the 2011 team or the 2007 team? I guess we're just going to duplicate Eli Manning then, Dave, right? We're going to have two versions of Eli Manning. Okay. Well, I think you bring up some interesting points. I do agree with you. 2011, Eli Manning statistically, I mean, that is arguably one of his best seasons in a New York Giants uniform. They rode his arm. Let's face it. People forget the battle and the grind of that regular season, which I always bring up. And, how close a lot of those games were and how they came down to the wire. And that team was pretty much a 500 football team until they won those two big games against the Jets and the Cowboys and, hey, rode that momentum to the Super Bowl. In terms of who would win, well, it's hard to go up against, David, a defense that really did a great job containing Tom Brady. Then again, remember, you also have two different coordinators. You got Spags and you got Perry Fuel. So, different guys all of a sudden at the reins can maybe, change the outlook of a unit. I would probably go with the 2007 team just because of the fact that they knocked off arguably one of the greatest teams in NFL history that was a few seconds or minutes away from completing perfection. And once again, what that unit did in terms of the rotational group of players in the front seven, just throwing their armor at Tom Brady left and right throughout the course of the game. And while Eli Manning was more impressive in 2011, I also think you can't overlook the fact that in 2007, the combination of Ahmad Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs, that 1-2 punch. And I'm not saying that the Giants didn't have a running game. Remember, their running game came alive in the postseason in 2011, much more so than the regular season. In 2007, when Bradshaw had that big rushing attack against Buffalo late in that 2007 season, which was a huge game people forget, there were more positive signs out of the rushing attack in 2007 than there were in 2011. But the accomplishment of the 2007 team is why I give my leverage and the edge to 2007. It's not to say that the 11 team is not going to have some success against the 2007 team, but I think the 2007 team, because Eli wasn't as dominant wasn't as polished. You still had a very good offensive line. You had a good rushing attack. I think the '07 team, I would argue, could find a variety of ways to win games, okay? And that's important. You can't go into a game thinking we're going to throw for 300 yards if all of a sudden they get after Eli. So I think the '07 team, a little bit more depth, a little bit more substance in terms of finding ways to win games, and some more veterans on the team around Eli Manning compared to what 11 was working with.
Yeah, I think like I actually heard you yesterday with Paul Dottino, and you guys were talking about some rankings where they were ranking like the best weapons in the NFL, and you guys were kind of discussing like the issues with some of these rankings, and I mean a lot of it is just there's no really sports to talk about right now, and like it's hard to come up with content. But you made some really good points about that, and then like a month ago, there was a ranking of the top 10 teams of, I think it was either the decade or the 2000s. And they put the 2007 Patriots on that list, like pretty high. I think they had them as like the fourth best team. And then they had a couple of other teams, including the 49ers from last year, on that list. But then at the same time, they don't even have any of the Giants teams or the 2007 Giants team. And I thought that was ridiculous because I think the 2007 Giants team was so talented, like when they were playing well. And yeah, like their offensive line, like you said, was so good, like running the ball. And then the next year, the offensive line played even better, and they had that awesome rushing attack. But I guess my answer is just that I thought Eli was just so special in 2011 that he would find a way to win and beat the other version of Eli. But and he was so good in that game against like San Francisco when, you know, they had such a good defense that year with Patrick Willis and Justin Smith, Alden Smith. They were a really good defense, and he found a way to win that game. So I thought that was like his best performance ever. So it's obviously a hypothetical and it's like impossible, but I just think it's kind of fun to think about. But I did want to add.
I didn't mean to cut you off, David. I was going to say I'm with you in terms of your analysis of 2011 because the Niners game is probably the best we've seen of Eli Manning in terms of his toughness and to just stand on his ground and his turf throughout the course of that contest, despite what the Niners were throwing at him. And, you know, as I mentioned previously, statistically based on the regular season, I don't think you're going to find a better year for Eli Manning than 2011. So if the question is about Eli, I'm with you there. But when I'm evaluating the team overall, I can't dismiss the strength of the offensive line in '07, the strength of the defense, especially with the rotation that can play out in '07 up front. And then, of course, the stronger rushing attack. So that's, to me, what pushes me over the 2011 squad.
Yeah, and I think like one of the most underrated throws of Eli's entire career, and it's not talked about as much as I think it probably should be, was the throw against San Francisco when he hit Manningham. I think it was like 3rd and 11 or 3rd and 15, and he hit Manningham for that big touchdown. I know we won that game in overtime, but I thought that was such a good throw. He put like a lot of velocity on it, and it was so accurate. And without that, I don't think we get past the 49ers. So, yeah, I thought Eli was so good that year. I did want to ask you a little bit about the current team a little bit. And I appreciate you coming on my show. This is a lot of fun for me. So I just want to thank you again. I want to ask you about the coaching staff, because we were talking about Coughlin before. And obviously Joe Judge is like a Bill Belichick disciple. I don't know if that's the right word, disciple, but he came from that coaching tree, and Nick Saban as well. But I'm really happy with like the coaching staff he put together. I think there's a lot of assistant coaches, not just the coordinators, but I think like the position coaches are going to make a big impact, especially with our younger players. Is there one position coach that you're the most excited about, or that you think will have like a much bigger impact than maybe fans would give him credit for this offseason, like out of the position coaches? Like for me, it's Mark Colombo, because I think the offensive line has been a weakness for so many years in a row. And he did a really good job in Dallas, especially with like La'el Collins, who was a really good right tackle the last couple of years. So is there a position coach, maybe like Colombo or somebody else, that you think could have a really big impact, like more than fans think?
I like the Colombo choice. He would probably be right at the top of my list. I think the fact that he played the position, David, And no disrespect to any of the previous offensive line coaches that the Giants have had, because Pat Flaherty, I think, is one of the overlooked coaches. I mean, he helped groom that tremendous group that the Giants had, where they had that consecutive start streak. So, he deserves a lot of credit. But there is something to be said when you have a former player that has been in the trenches, understands the position. I think how he can relate to the players on the roster, and also the fact that he's not that far removed from the game, too. So I think Colombo absolutely is a very strong asset. The other guy I was going to bring up was Burns, the running backs coach, who was an associate head coach under Nick Saban for a number of seasons. So from what I've been told, and I even had a conversation with Nick Saban that is still up on Giants.com, and when I asked him about Burns, he said, Burns doesn't care who you are. He doesn't care if you're Saquon Barkley. He doesn't care if you're Wayne Goldman. He's going to expect you to take his advice and then prove it on the field. So I like the outlook for Burns, because I think he's going to hold everybody in that running backs room accountable. And I think that while Saquon Barkley is certainly a dynamic talent, I think anybody who could maybe pull a little bit more, David, out of Saquon Barkley, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So Colombo and Burns, I would say, are probably the two guys who I am most excited about to see the impact they can have on their respective position groups. And I don't think it's a coincidence that those are two very important position groups that go hand in hand, that are probably going to dictate the outlook and the level of success that the Giants will have this season to help complement Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I'm excited about Burns too. Like, Alabama has had so many good running backs over the years.
Yeah.
Like Derrick Henry won the Heisman, Ingram won the Heisman, and last year Josh Jacobs. I thought Jacobs actually should have won Rookie of the Year because he was awesome. And he was on my fantasy team, so I followed him really.
He was on my fantasy team too, so I can relate to that.
Oh, that's cool. I know you do fantasy for like Sirius as well, and like you do fantasy work, but I didn't realize you play too. So that's really cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very passionate about fantasy football. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, because like for me, it's a challenge sometimes, because I'll pick players that are playing against the Giants, and I do find myself rooting for them. So it's like, it's hard to sometimes, like if I have an Eagle on my team, I try not to do that, but sometimes it happens where you have an Eagle receiver or something like that. So yeah, is it like, do you find yourself during the games like, oh, I'm like covering this game, I'm being objective, but at the same time it's like, oh, that'd be nice if my guy could get some catches, or you just don't think about it like during the game?
Well, I cover the entire NFL, in all fairness, for my work on Sirius, as you mentioned. So I actually look at it, David, at least my perspective of fantasy football, is it's a great tool to keep up with the league, especially on game day, where I'm obviously mainly focusing on the Giants game, because that's the one game I'm analyzing and talking the most about. But it also is a good way to keep up with the rest of the league. And I know this may be a cheesy, politically correct answer, but whenever I cover the team or I cover the league, I try to take the fan cap off or my allegiance to specific players, because it just makes it a lot less stressful and a lot easier to just do my job. So I look at it more of a job. I'm there to look at the game from a big picture perspective, provide analysis. I'm not there to have a rooting interest. I'm not there to specifically pull for an individual player or pull for an individual team. So maybe it just comes easier to me than most. And I'm not going to say that there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but I've never struggled with the fan aspect or the rooting interest, because I just stick to the task at hand, that it's a job. And in order to do the job as best as possible, look at the game as a whole and not look at it from one angle and so forth. Actually, I will say this. The toughest thing that I find from a fantasy perspective is when I have multiple teams. And I've had multiple teams for the last few years. This is the worst. And you've got one guy on your team, and then you're going up against him on another team. That actually is probably the only thing that I can't handle, because it's so frustrating. You don't know, is it good that he's helping your team, but is it terrible that he's then hurting you in another league? So that I find to be the most convoluted, complicated aspect of fantasy football. Outside of that, all of the other aspects, I just look at it as a good way to keep up with the rest of the league and the rest of the players. And, fantasy football, like anything else, David, it's out of your control. You hope to make the best decision based on the matchup and based on your outlook of that player. Everything else is out of your hands. So as much frustration or enthusiasm as you show, at the end of the day, it's still not going to make a difference in terms of the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I give you a lot of credit because it's hard for me to be objective. Like I just started this YouTube channel, so I find myself though, like during the season when the Giants lose, I'll not want to watch SportsCenter for like a week straight. I don't want to like pay attention. Like no offense, like I won't be listening to your podcast like the day after a loss because I just kind of try to forget it. But when they win, I'm just like so excited. I just want to get as much Giant content as I can. Maybe there's other fans like me, but I'm just
that's just the way I am. David, you're not on an island. Trust me. I've interacted with a lot of fans. You are not alone. You are absolutely not alone. Don't feel that way. Yes. Yeah, because I'm so into fantasy football too, and it is tough. Like when you have players that are facing each other, like two quarterbacks. That's why I feel like the perfect amount of fantasy teams is to have like two, because once you have more than that, it becomes convoluted, like you said, where you get guys that are facing each other, but you're not sure who to really root for. So yeah, but fantasy football is a lot of fun. I can't wait for that. So actually, this is not just this is a coincidence. I wanted to ask you who you would pick first in fantasy football this year, Saquon or McCaffrey, like if you have the first pick. Because I feel like it does come down to those two players. And I do think Saquon's going to have a monster year. Like watching him in his workouts this offseason, it looks like he bulked up and he's like in amazing shape. But then McCaffrey was just so good last year. And I'm not sure how good the Panthers are going to be, though. So that's why I would actually lean towards Saquon. But who would you take if you had the first pick overall this year? Wow, boy, you're really putting me on the spot here. It's funny because I did another podcast where somebody asked me a similar question, but it was more of constructing a team as if you were GM, not necessarily from fantasy. I think you hit on two interesting points. First of all, you've got both players being thrown into new offenses, okay? You've got Saquon, as good as he is, remember, it's still a new offense with Jason Garrett, and then to your point, the Panthers completely, like the Giants, changed everything. They got a new head coach in Matt Rule. They've got a new offensive coordinator. So Christian McCaffrey has to adapt to that. And Christian McCaffrey also has a new quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater, too. Cam's not there anymore. They still have pretty much the wide receivers that they were working with last year. And the offensive line has changed a little. I lean towards McCaffrey, and here's why. The reason I'm going to lean towards Christian McCaffrey is for a few different aspects. Number one, McCaffrey's been a little bit more consistent in terms of the number of receptions that he's hauled in over the last few seasons, okay? And remember, this is a fantasy analysis, David, because I can see your reaction already. You're like, oh, Lance decided not to go with my man Saquon. But I got to look at it through the fantasy lens. Consistency with respect to McCaffrey. If it's a PPR league, points per reception, okay, McCaffrey holds a little bit more value because of how many receptions he hauls in. And let's face it, the Panthers don't have the same type of talent with respect to the tight end and the wide receiver position that the Panthers do, which means McCaffrey is likely to get more targets and more opportunities, David, with respect to the receiving game. And Teddy Bridgewater, remember when he had that 5-game stretch that he filled in for Drew Brees, he had a guy like Alvin Kamara, and he leaned a lot on his running back. So that's another thing I'm taking into consideration. Number two, durability. I'm not saying Saquon's injury prone because one season is not enough of an indication. McCaffrey has yet to miss a game. He's been extremely durable. That's another big factor I have to take into consideration when I'm making a fantasy pick. And once again, as great as Saquon is, and I think there should be a lot of excitement surrounding this team, he is surrounded by Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, Darius Slayton. Hopefully Evan Ingram stays healthy. Caden Smith had a really nice stretch last year. Let's not dismiss him. That's a lot more firepower, David, than what we're talking about with respect to Christian McCaffrey. And fantasy and opportunity go hand in hand. And if you're going to be the heavy lifter, then you're a little bit more attractive. Now, I could still make comparisons between Zeke and Saquon Barkley because this is Jason Garrett's offense. And as you well know, Garrett and that offense utilized a lot with Zeke. Zeke was not as big in the receiving game, though, in fairness, as a guy like Christian McCaffrey. So you have to look at it through that standpoint. And also, with respect to who's playing behind Saquon Barkley compared to who Zeke had, I think the Giants have Dion Lewis, Wayne Goldman, a little bit more flexibility, some more attractive options than what Dallas was working with in the backfield. So is there a chance that Jason Garrett tries to utilize some other guys as opposed to giving Saquon everything? Yeah, I don't think that's crazy to throw out there. So once again, you take all of that into consideration, that's why I would give the slight edge. If we're talking about fantasy, of course, we're talking about fantasy, I'd go with Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I definitely understand that because McCaffrey is such a good receiver. I feel like if McCaffrey, he wouldn't do this, but if he switched to slot receiver and just played receiver full time, he can possibly be like a Julian Edelman, like a really good slot receiver in the NFL. And yeah, that's a good point about the offense around him, where he's gonna. I mean, the Giants do have a lot of good weapons, and the Panthers, I feel like, aren't as diverse in their offense. So at the same time, like if it's just me being like not objective, I would always pick the Giants player if it's close.
Understandable.
So it's fun. It's just fun to have like a Giants player, especially one as good as Barkley on the team. But yeah, I think both are going to be awesome this year. I think they're the two best running backs. And interestingly, both running backs were picked by Gettleman. So he did draft the two best running backs in the NFL. And I wanted to ask you about the draft because like I feel like there's been a lot of talk about Andrew Thomas and McKinney and even Darnay Holmes. I think is definitely going to have an impact because he's either, in my opinion, he's either going to start at slot, but he also has a chance of starting at the second cornerback spot because I feel like it's a little bit up in the air after Bradbury. But I guess my question is, which of the guys that the Giants, drafted maybe later in the draft, do you think can have a bigger impact than fans would expect? Is there anyone like late or maybe even like an undrafted free agent? Do you think there's someone that can like surprise and have a much bigger impact than maybe their draft status would indicate?
It's interesting you threw in the undrafted rookies in with that because I would love to select an undrafted player, and I'll give you one name. My only concern, David, is the fact that if the rumors are true and they don't allow 90 players into training camp and we're talking more about 75 to 80, I just think the chances of these guys making the 53, they could very well make the practice squad, it's going to be much more difficult. So in all likelihood, then their impact is going to be perhaps very limited. The one undrafted guy that jumps out to me is Benjamin Victor, the tall wide receiver out of Ohio State. I believe he's 6'4". If you look at film of his, big red zone target. Also, I think he has the ability for yardage after the catch, which is somewhat overlooked if you look at how Ohio State utilized him. So, that would be one name that would jump out to me. But once again, I can't dismiss the fact that if you're not going to have as many guys in camp, and you also look at the depth at wide receiver right now, and Corey Coleman trying to work his way back, who I think you can't forget, it may be difficult for somebody like Benjamin Victor to have an immediate impact. Could he be on the practice squad? Absolutely. So that may be a year from now where you start to really see his true colors as opposed to now. As far as the drafted guys who I think could very well make an impact, Shane Lemieux is intriguing because Lemieux, I think, is somebody that's going to get work at center. Never played center at Oregon, but talking to the coaching staff there, they gave him snaps at center during the week. They prepared him for the potential for him to having to step into that spot on the NFL level. And Spencer Pulley right now is the guy. Outside of that, we don't know what's going to happen with John Jalapeno recovering from injury and technically not on the roster right now. So could Lemieux impress in camp and push Spencer Pulley? I don't think that's crazy at all. I mean, he was a consistent starter at Oregon. He was durable. He played guard his entire career, but we've seen a lot of guys transfer over to center, and he certainly has received reps in practice, which may even be more important than center. And I know he's been working on taking some center snaps all offseason based on what he said. So that's one guy that I think comes to mind. Carter Coughlin is very intriguing, David, out of Minnesota. Perhaps an undersized pass rusher, but somebody that I think you can't overlook his production. Had a lot of sacks over the course of his career. I think this is a guy that could wow people as a special teamer year one. We forget, we focus so much on, what's the guy going to do on defense? What's he going to do on offense? Well, Joe Judge is a special team guy, right? Yeah. If anything, he's looking for those playmakers, and they lost Michael Thomas, who I referenced earlier. You need those glue guys, David, on special teams. You need those players that are willing to do the dirty work, that are willing to play on all four units and make those splash plays. Think about the strides that the Giants have made on special teams over the last few years when we've been talking about for years, not much game-changing plays in the return game, a lot of mishaps in terms of coverage. Well, you don't talk about the Giants like that in that light anymore. So Carter Coughlin is somebody I could see starting off on special teams and then little by little maybe getting more and more comfortable with Patrick Graham's scheme. And then the other guy who I would throw in the similar light to Carter Coughlin would be Cam Brown out of Penn State, another guy who has potential in terms of getting after the quarterback, sort of a jack-of-all-trades type of guy at Penn State, special teamer to start, then maybe branch out into becoming somebody more significant on defense. So those would be the three guys that I think have the potential. But I think, once again, expectations need to be kept in check because, once again, no on-field work during the course of this offseason, learning a new scheme. We don't know how long training camp's going to be. Although I could tell you and sit here that I think all these guys have all the potential in the world, I think we've got to be realistic, David, in terms of what we expect out of late-round draft picks and how quickly they can make an impact on the field this year.
Yeah, you make a really good point about the depleted rosters. I don't know if that's the right word, but they're only allowing like a certain amount of players at camp because of what's going on. And there's so many guys that I'm really excited to see. And I really hope that there are some preseason games, although it doesn't seem very likely at this point. But I really wanted to see how Benjamin Victor would do because we do need that tall receiver, like you were saying. And I feel like he could be a good red zone threat. And I do like that we picked a lot of those athletic linebackers at the end of the draft. I feel like that has been a weakness for our defense because I just feel like we haven't really emphasized, especially in the draft, the middle linebacker position. And I wanted to ask you about Coughlin because Coughlin is very interesting to me. He's really the only edge kind of player that we drafted. Do you foresee him, because he is a little bit undersized, I feel like, to play like outside linebacker full time, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Do you feel like he's eventually going to transition kind of like Anthony Barr did for the Vikings, where he played edge at UCLA and then he became like a off-ball linebacker? Do you think Coughlin could have a similar career to that, or do you see him more as like a situational pass rusher, or do you think I'm like underrating him and he could just be like a very good outside linebacker eventually if he proves himself on special teams?
I think he has the potential to be a productive outside linebacker. I would not rule that out. As far as dropping him back into coverage and so forth, I don't really know at this stage whether or not that would be a strong suit or whether or not the Giants even envision utilizing him to that degree. I think that situational pass rusher, I'm with you, David. I think that would be the first spot that I would look to put him in, bring him in on downs where you want to get a few more guys on the field that you think you get after the quarterback. And, that was his strong suit in Minnesota. The numbers don't lie. He had 20-some-odd sacks in a very short period of time. So, Minnesota looked at him as a guy, hey, put your hand in the ground, go to work, period, do your thing. So I think that if they can find spots to tap into that would be where I would start. But I look at him mainly as a special teamer in the early goings of his Giants career, then branching into a situational pass rusher. And then if they get to a point where he's comfortable being that outside guy, sure. But, as far as dropping back into coverage or really experimenting, I think they're going to have to see that in practice, David, before they just throw him out there. And I also think that you want to see some of these other guys, in fairness, currently on the roster, spread their wings first before maybe you throw Coughlin in. And I'm talking about, Shane Zimenez or Lorenzo Carter. I mean, those two guys, I think these are significant seasons for those two players. It's show-me time for both. Zimenez, I know it's only year 2, but Carter, it's year 3. And Carter was not a first-round pick, so that means he's going to be entering the final year of his rookie deal. And I've said this time and time again, David, they have one guy on the roster right now that's had a double-digit sack season. That's Kyler Fackrell. That's it. 10.5 sacks 2 years ago. Outside of him, nobody else has had a season where they've had at least 10 sacks. That means the Giants need somebody to emerge. They need somebody to step up because we don't know if Marcus Golden is coming back. We don't know how that's going to play out. And even if Golden does come back, you still need multiple playmakers that can get after the quarterback. It could be done in the NFL where you can have a piecemeal approach. This idea that you got to have one guy with 20 sacks to save you. No. New England, for example, since they parted ways with Chandler Jones, New England didn't have really a dominant guy. I know they had Trey Flowers for a few years. Outside of him, don't tell me they had another 2 or 3 guys that blink of an eye could give you 10 sacks. Yeah, Kyle Van Noy. That guys who could give you flashes here or there. It can be done in piecemeal. But in order, David, for it to be done in piecemeal, you need to have a number of guys that could get you at least 5 or 6 sacks. And I don't know if the Giants are even at that point as the roster stands right now.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points. Zimenez is someone I'm really hopeful for because I feel like he did play less than half the snaps last year, but he still had 4.5 sacks. So I'm hoping that he'll play more. And you're right, he definitely needs the opportunity to, show how he can do in like a full-time role. And also Carter has a lot of potential. One reason I'm really hopeful for Coughlin is supposedly his 10-yard split was in like the 99th percentile. And he's like a very quick player, and he's a smart player too. And that reminds me a lot of Ryan Connolly, because I wrote an article about them. And actually, Connolly went to like the same high school as Carter. And Connolly was another player who had a really good 10-yard split. And he was really good at like diagnosing plays and just like diving into the backfield to make the tackles. So I'm hoping that like Coughlin could have a similar type of impact and really surprise people. Because I thought Connolly was really good last year before his injury. So I'm hoping, he's 100% and ready to go. It seems like he will be because I thought he was awesome last year. I thought he was like the best linebacker, Connolly, before he got injured. I thought he was playing really well. So, yeah, I wanted to ask a couple rapid, other questions. I shouldn't say rapid fire, but who do you say will lead the Giants in receiving yards? Because we definitely don't have one guy that I feel like is head and shoulders above the other receivers. I think our tight end, Evan Ingram, obviously has a lot of potential to be possibly a top 5 tight end in the NFL. But who would you say, like, if you had to predict right now, who's going to lead the team in like receiving yards this year?
I think Golden Tate has the best track record in that department. If you look at his previous stints with the Lions as well as the Eagles, which was a brief tenure because he was traded there at the midway point a few seasons ago. And the only reason why he didn't play every game last year, of course, was because of the 4-game suspension. But if you remove that and you put him out on the field and some of the chemistry he built with Daniel Jones and how the fact that he is so effective with yardage after the catch, I mean, that's been a big staple of Golden Tate's game. That would be the guy that I'd put my money on. I think track record, durability favor Golden Tate. Sterling Shepard, you've got the injury and the concussion concern. So he certainly has to prove that he can stay on the field. Darius Slayton had an outstanding rookie campaign. But here's the thing, David. Darius Slayton, I think, benefited from the fact that he was on the field a lot when the other guys weren't. Remember, the Giants didn't have one game last season where they had their 5 best weapons on the field at the same time, which is unreal. I mean, it's still hard for me to understand that, but people forget. They did not have their 3 wide receivers, their running back, and the tight end on the field all together once last season. So when people start projecting numbers, my response is, well, if Darius Slayton could do that last year, then he's automatically going to, add on X amount of receiving yards and receptions. I say, listen, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, but let's take a step back. Slayton benefited because the targets went up, David, the fact that he didn't have to compete, right, with the other guys on the field. So you have to look at it through that lens. Football doesn't work where you take where the guy finished and then you just add on top of it. It's the environment, what goes on around the players impacts the outlook of the players. So Golden Tate, he's been surrounded by a lot of different talent over the course of his career. That's why I think he's probably the best bet. I was very high on Evan Ingram last season, and I'm still very high on him. But Evan also has to help me out a little bit. Evan, all right, the injury bug, you got to avoid the injury bug because I am not trying to come up with excuses, but David, through the first 5 games last season, he was on pace for a career year. Go back and look at what he did. And then all of a sudden, the injury came back. So, my projections are all based on, in an ideal world, if Evan Ingram stays healthy, yes, I think he certainly is more than capable of leading the team in receiving yards. Also, I like the fact that Jason Garrett heavily utilized his tight ends in the course of his tenure. Look at what Jason Witten did. Giants fans understand what I'm talking about. Just look at Jason's numbers against the Giants over the course of his career. And Blake Jarwin has been a very productive player each of the last 2 seasons. So Evan, if he stays healthy, and I knew for a fact, I'd probably go with him. But Golden Tate is by far the most logical answer when you take into consideration his history and the dynamics of the rest of the team.
Yeah, I really like the Golden Tate pick because I've asked this question to like some other Giant YouTubers, and I feel like the most common answer is Slayton because he did have a really good year last year and he was a rookie, and like usually they progress to their second year. But like you said, there was so many injuries last year at the receiver position, and he kind of benefited from that. And I was actually really surprised how fast Tate was, because I think about the play against the Jets where they threw him like a little screen pass and he just ran by all the secondary. There was a play against the Patriots when he was really, the number one option by far, and they threw him that long pass and he kind of burned everybody. So I think he's like a lot faster than people give him credit for, because he's like better in the slot, but he is like an explosive receiver at the same time, and he's like really good after the catch. So I think I think you definitely convinced me. I was gonna say Sterling Shepard, but yeah, just like looking at the track record, I think Tate is like the most accomplished, and he would probably be the smartest bet to end up leading the team. And
his
at
numbers,
the same time,
David, his numbers have been consistent. If you even combine the year where he split with Philly and Detroit, we're talking about a guy that's always around that 1,000-yard mark. So, consistency too is where I go with respect to my answer. And the fact that Daniel Jones and him built some nice chemistry together when they were both on the field. You actually referenced the Patriots game. Remember, that was the game where the ball deflected and then went right into Golden Tate's hands, and then he ran in for a touchdown on that Thursday night game. So, Tate made some nice plays for Daniel Jones last year, and if they ever can get back on the field, I think there's no reason why they can't at least build upon that.
Yeah, I think Tate is couldn't have a really big year, because I'm really hopeful about Daniel Jones. I mean, I recently made a YouTube video comparing Daniel Jones and Baker Mayfield and why I think Jones is better. And I know I got a lot of grief in the comment section, because obviously Baker has a longer track record. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. He has the rookie touchdown record. But that's just how I feel, and I tried to put an objective analysis for why I think Daniel Jones is better at this point. And I thought you made a really good point about he never had one game or even one snap where he had all his receivers, his running back, and his tight end healthy at the same time. So yeah, like, do you foresee? I mean, it's hard. It's a kind of a hard question to ask because there's a lot of projection. But do you foresee a possibility where Daniel Jones sneaks into like the top 10 fantasy wise? Because I feel like the offense at this point is can be pretty explosive if the offensive line ends up being as good as I think it could be, with the improved offensive line with Andrew Thomas. And then I think Barkley's going to really help, because I feel like he was a lot better last year when Barkley was playing. So I guess my question is, like, is that a possibility, or do you think I'm being like overly optimistic that Daniel Jones could be like a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year, or maybe even a little better than that?
Well, I think a lot of his statistics were encouraging last year, David, especially when you look at the completion percentage, the touchdown to interception ratio. Had 24 touchdowns last year. I think if you're talking top 10, you got to get into the 30s. You probably need to get more into that 35 category. So, you're going to ask him to now throw for 11 more touchdowns. He did that in 12 starts last year. Now you're going to add 4 more to get 11 out of 4. I think that may be pressing it a bit. And here's the other thing. And this is something we can't overlook. Where's the turnover total going to be this year, David? I mean, that to me is a huge indicator of whether or not he could get into that top 10 category, because especially I'm thinking about it through a fantasy lens, which is how you posed it. When you lose a fumble, as many as he did, right, you minus 2 points. That's not going to help your cause in staying in the top 10. Remember, this is a quarterback that had 12 interceptions and he had 11 lost fumbles. So that's 23 turnovers. Do the math. You times that by 2. Okay, that's 46 points I'm taking away from you just on turnovers right there. And that's the difference between making the top 10 versus all of a sudden being in that 15 ballpark. So I think we're talking about probably maybe a little ways away from getting into that top 10 category. If not this season, maybe, a season or 2 away, depending on also, remember, how comfortable he gets within Jason Garrett's offense. The fact that, they don't have a full offseason again, which I've said a million times, but I'm going to continue to repeat myself because you have to bring it up. There's a lot of rookie quarterbacks that things haven't necessarily clicked when all of a sudden they learn a new offense. I brought this point up a lot, and in no ways am I saying Daniel Jones is going down this road, but Alex Smith had 7 different offensive coordinators in the span of a very small period of time. And it impacted his development. There's a reason why he didn't click until 2011. So Daniel Jones is going to have 3 now in the span of 3 years. Okay, that's a lot. Despite what Daniel Jones showed, you always need to take that into consideration. So I don't think he'd be in the top 10 this year. I think the trajectory is certainly moving upwards, but I think he also needs to get a better handle on ball security, because ball security is something both from a realistic standpoint that could hurt him and also, most important to your question, from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, because it is a brand new offense and a brand new head coach, brand new offensive coordinator. And I thought Colin Cowherd made a really good point. I don't listen to his show that much, but I did hear that he said if Joe Burrow has the same statistics, maybe not counting the fumbles, but if he has the same like touchdowns to interceptions as Daniel Jones, because if you extrapolate that over a 16-game season, I think that's 32 touchdowns. But he said that Joe Burrow would run away with Rookie of the Year. So I wanted to ask you if you agree with that. But I also wanted to ask you, because I'm really interested, since you're like very much in Giants media, who do you like listen to for your like sports content? Or is it like you do it so much as a job that you don't want to like listen to it in your free time as well? So that's my like two-part question.
Well, you're saying Joe Burrow, if he finishes with the rookie year statistically that Daniel Jones had, is that pretty much the way you're phrasing it, David?
Yeah, I think basically what he said was that if Joe Burrow had 24 touchdowns to 12 interceptions and had the same type of season as Daniel Jones last year, that he's actually going to run away with Rookie of the Year. And he was actually backing Jones up, because I think Jones does get a lot of grief for his fumbles, and a lot of people underrate him. Like in Madden, I know Madden's not that important, but I think the players do.
I can't say I'm looking at the Madden video game to shape my sports talk opinion. But go ahead. Yeah.
But he does get he gets really low ratings in that game, and I feel like it is kind of an example of just how people feel about Daniel Jones. But I think Howard was actually saying if Burrow has the same numbers that Jones did last year, then he would actually run away with the Rookie of the Year award, because Jones did actually have a really good year despite some difficult circumstances with the offensive line issues and, his injuries at wide receiver. So do you agree with that? Do you think Burrow could run away with the similar numbers that Jones had? And then who do you listen to for fun, either on the radio or on TV and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, let's start with Daniel Jones. When he prefaces it by saying run away with, I'd also have to see what some of these other younger players, young quarterbacks, and players at other positions do to say run away with it, because Daniel Jones did not run away with things, in all fairness, with respect to other rookie quarterbacks. Kyler Murray had a very good year, and even Gardner Minshew. If you look statistically, David, in all fairness, I think all 3 of those guys had very good years. Now, the expectations for Jones and Murray were a lot different than Minshew. Minshew was a late-round pick, whereas Murray and Jones, where they were taken, expectations come with the territory. So in all fairness, you have to look at it from that standpoint. As far as if Joe Burrow walks away with Daniel Jones this season, I don't think that's disappointing at all. See, I would agree with you. I think Daniel Jones had a very solid rookie campaign. I just think that you have to, in fairness, you have to take into consideration the turnovers. You can't just dismiss them. You have to say, hey, Daniel Jones had a great season, but the bottom line is you can't continue to fumble the ball at the same rate you do. And it's not just because of Daniel Jones, David. It's because of the entire outlook of the offense. Think about this. The Giants had the worst turnover differential in the NFL last year, tied with the Chargers. Yeah. Minus 17. David, you tell me a team that has a minus 17 turnover differential and is going to position themselves to win games and knock on the door of the playoffs. It's not going to happen. There's a reason why they only had 4 wins. It goes hand in hand. There was a reason why the Chargers only had 5 wins with that same turnover differential. That's not a coincidence. So it impacts the entire team, and it also hurts your defense because it doesn't put the defense in a good spot, and it takes away offensive scoring opportunities. Think about all the lost opportunities, David, that the Giants had when Daniel Jones had a fumble or an interception. Missed opportunities, scoring drives, they get interrupted. So, I mean, this is stating the obvious, but sometimes it has to be emphasized again, because I think, and I'm not saying you in particular, but when people look at Daniel Jones' season, and if we're bringing up the turnovers, it's not because we're hating on Daniel Jones. It's just, it's fair criticism in terms of that has to improve. to not just help him, but help the Giants as well. But if you take that away, 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, a completion percentage around 65, some big-time throws, as you noted, not being the starter the first 2 weeks of the season, not getting the first team reps in training camp, we take all of that into consideration. And you were to tell me under those conditions, Daniel Jones is having the season that he had? Absolutely. It's a hell of a campaign. And people, in fairness, need to emphasize that as much as they emphasize the issue with the ball security. But the bottom line is you got to see it both ways. You can't just look at Daniel Jones' rookie season with all the good. You have to look at the things that he needs to work on. And he'd be the first one to tell you that too. But yes, Daniel Jones, let's not lose perspective here. A very impressive rookie season. There's no doubt about it. Now, part two of your question, after my long-winded response to part one, Joe Burrow has that type of season, David. I would agree with the analysis. I think that puts him in a very good position to win Rookie of the Year. Does it put him in a position to run away with it? I'd have to see the landscape of the rookie class to give you a fair response to that. As far as other people in the industry that I listen to or I consume, you are right, and you read me quite well. As somebody that does this for a living, when I am not on the air, the one thing that I don't really want to do is consume sports radio, sports talk, analysis, and so forth. If anything, in fairness, I may be listening to my own work, to self-critique, to improve myself. And I purposely, and people may say this is good, bad, indifferent, whatever it may be. The reason I don't like to listen to a lot of other people when it comes to shows and so forth, I don't, David, like to be influenced by what they say. I like to go into a show, especially whether I'm on Sirius or even on the Giants, and based on my own homework, based on my own research, I then want people to know this is not me shaping a narrative based on what I'm hearing, what I'm consuming. This is based on the way that I'm looking at it, and you're getting my assessment. So I purposely don't listen to a lot of other people in volume for that very reason. Now, in fairness, do I see clippings on social media? Will people send me something and say, hey, look at this, what do you think? Absolutely. And do I listen to some sound and audio to then build segments around on my own show? No doubt about it. But no, I don't listen to somebody enough on a regular basis to tell you that, this is somebody I turn to for the very reason I do not want to be influenced by somebody else's opinion, and I want to keep my stuff fresh. So there really is nobody that I consume other than I will give you growing up play-by-play, which is something that I'm extremely passionate about and something I love to do. So maybe I would say I listen to more people from a play-by-play standpoint than I do from a talk analysis standpoint. And I mean, Marv Albert, for example, was a guy that, grew up listening to, watching Bob Costas, two guys in particular. Marv Albert actually went to my high school. We're both Brooklyn natives, Lincoln High School. So certainly have some bias and ties to him through that standpoint. So I would say if there's anybody listen to and consume, much more from the play-by-play standpoint, because I don't find myself being influenced. It's more of structure, how do you adapt to a situation in a game, strategy, more so than the content, if that answers pretty much what you were asking.
Yeah, I definitely understand. Like, even though I'm not a professional and I'm not on the radio all the time, I do find myself, since I'm like making Giants YouTube videos and I write articles as well, when I want to relax, it's like I don't want to listen to other people talk about the Giants anymore because it's like there's only so much Giants that I can take. But did you see the Michael Jordan entire like documentary? Because I thought that was incredible. I thought that was really cool that they like pushed the date up because obviously there's no sports to watch. But I thought that was like the best sports documentary I've ever seen. So, and since you're a big Jordan fan, were you like crazy about that? Did you think that was awesome?
Very much enjoyed it. Yeah, I liked every aspect of it. I also, liked the coverage of the team, not just Jordan, but yeah, it was very well put together. It covered just about every angle that I wanted. And, a lot of people criticize, well, there was so much more they could have explored. Yeah, they could have done a 20-episode documentary in fairness, David. But yes, very much enjoyed it. It actually is currently on my DVR to watch back whenever, to your point, I may want to relax and not do things that are of the professional realm. But yes, extremely excited leading up to it, and my expectations were met and then some. And I would agree with you. I was very happy that they moved it up. So maybe if there was any benefit to this pandemic, it was the fact that we didn't have to wait till June with it going up against the NBA Finals. We were able to see it a few months earlier.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome, and I'm such a big Knicks fan, so it was so cool to see.
Well, then I don't know how enjoyable you found it then, David. If you're a big Knicks fan,
I still liked it because like I was 6 years old when like the finals happened in 1994, and I still remember watching those games like pretty vividly. Obviously they lost in 7 games, but I just love those teams. Like that was such a lovable team because you had like Ewing and Oakley and Mason, and they had so many tough guys, and John Starks was like the best like underdog type of guy to root for. So it was cool to just see it. But yeah, it stinks because like obviously Jordan is probably the biggest reason the Knicks didn't end up winning in the 90s, and we came so close when he retired. But yeah, I don't know if the Knicks are going to win it anytime soon too, which is kind of sad as well. But yeah, I appreciate you being on my show so much. This has been a lot of fun. I did want to ask you like one last question to wrap it up, if that's cool. I know,
sure.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I wanted to say the Giants are the only team to win a Super Bowl in the last 4 decades, like the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and then the 2010s. So that means we're due for another Super Bowl this decade, even though I think it technically starts next year. But do you think there's like a sense of urgency to win? Obviously not this year, where I think we're considered a rebuilding team. But do you think there's a sense of urgency to win in like the first part of this decade? Because Daniel Jones is on like his rookie contract, and then you can, because of that, you have less money towards the quarterback, and you can like maybe build a really good defense in the next couple of years, or add like some really nice weapons for him. Or do you think it's overstated? Because obviously if Jones is as good as I think he's going to be, he's going to ask for a lot of money when his contract is up. So I guess my question is like, when do you see the Giants being Super Bowl contenders? And when is like around what time period do you foresee us being in the conversation for winning the Super Bowl?
Well, once again, another great question in terms of the patience approach when it comes to football versus the urgency approach. I'll say this first, David. I think everybody is always showing urgency to win in this league, no matter where the media or the public perception is, because think about the turnover rate in this league. And coaches know their shelf life is just as short as the players. And so do front office executives. So I think, there's always that urgency that you want to win, whether you have a quarterback on a rookie contract or you have a quarterback on a new deal like Patrick Mahomes just signed. I do agree with you where I think that teams realize the window to take advantage of the rookie quarterback is small. So therefore, if you can maybe surround the quarterback with talent while the quarterback is on a rookie contract, maybe it gives you a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more leeway. But as far as where the Giants are with respect to Super Bowl contention, I think this defense has to show a lot over the next few seasons. And they're learning a new scheme. There's a lot of youth on this defense. And when you have youth, that means that these guys, just as I mentioned with Daniel Jones, some of these defensive players, David, they're learning their third new defense in as many years. The year they were in college as seniors or juniors, then what they did under James Betcher, and now Patrick Graham. So you're throwing a lot on the plate of young defensive players. Some guys thrive in that arena. Some guys struggle. I talked about limiting pass rushers. Well, who emerges this season? I think any team right now that you see is in contention, they've got at least 2 proven guys in the pass rushing department, or 2 proven guys that put fear in the eyes of the offensive line or the offense. And they say, hey, we got to double this guy. We got to give attention to this guy. How many guys on the Giants defense right now do you think offensive coordinators are looking at and saying, well, we got to put 2 guys here? I wouldn't necessarily come up with an overwhelming amount of players. San Francisco. Well, what does San Francisco have? 5 of the last 6 years, they used a first-round pick on a defensive lineman. They got a lot of depth. They got a lot of playmakers. They traded away DeForest Buckner to the Indianapolis Colts this year. Well, they signed Eric Armstead. They got Nick Bosa. They just drafted Javon Kinlaw. They got a lot of guys. And then the linebackers, too, D Ford. Okay, Quan Alexander, all of these playmakers. The Giants are not there yet. And it may take another draft or two, David, for them to get to that level of substance, of volume. So, you need to get the depth, you need to get the balance. That has to happen specifically on defense. And then with the secondary, James Bradbury is a polished veteran, but who's going to emerge around him? Remember, Bradbury can only cover one side of the field and one guy, okay? He can't handle what's going to happen on the other side of the field. Corey Valentine, Sam Beal, young guys. Let's see what happens with some of these rookies that we were talking about earlier. McKinney's a young player. Jabril Peppers, he's learning a new defense. He's also coming off an injury too. So, there's a lot of question marks on defense. It doesn't mean there's not potential, there's not upside, but I don't know if I see a 180 out of this defense that quickly. The offense, I think, has more proven commodities, more explosive playmakers, but it's all going to fall on the offensive line and how consistent that group plays, what type of an impact Andrew Thomas makes, what happens with respect to the center position. And then, the other part on offense is the health factor, which we also talked a great deal about. You can have all the playmakers in the world, but are the guys going to stay on the field? So, once again, a lot of unknowns, a lot of question marks. And when that comes to the forefront, sometimes the teams surprise a lot of people and exceed expectations, but more often than not, I think they fall pretty much on the middle ground. So I think the Giants may be a year or two away from knocking on that door to at least be a true playoff contender where you see that consistency, you see that comfort level with respect to the coaching staff. And also I think the coaching staff needs to get a feel of the team too. Let's not forget about that. These guys only know each other like we're knowing each other right now through a Zoom interaction. And there's limitations with respect to that. I also can't overlook the substance of the NFC, David. And there's a lot of teams that are pretty good in the NFC that are not fading away anytime soon. San Francisco, I don't think, is going anywhere anytime soon. Seattle, think about all the movable parts that they've had, the musical chairs, they've pretty much stayed steady. In the division, Philadelphia is still very strong. Dallas, I don't think, is going anywhere. In the North, Minnesota, Green Bay is starting to emerge with their new coach. And the South, boy, the South may be the deepest division right now in terms of Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay. You certainly like New Orleans. Atlanta has been up and down, but has Matt Ryan and some pieces. And Carolina is, maybe somewhat in the same ballpark as the Giants, revamping things. Everybody has to get comfortable with one another. So, even if we talk about the Giants making strides this season, just because you make strides doesn't mean the rest of the NFC is coming down to meet you. Those teams are still staying in a very strong position. So you have to look at it within the confines of the Giants as well as the confines of the NFC. I think, to me, improvement for the Giants this year, the way that I look at it, is individuals, David. All of these young players, how do they take a step forward? It's not so much the team. It's, can Lorenzo Carter emerge? Can O'Shane Ximines prove to be that consistent pass rusher? What do we see out of Darius Slayton? Can Evan Ingram stay healthy? Can Caden Smith be that great complementary piece? If all of those check marks are met, I would say that's a huge step in the right direction for the Giants, as opposed to me telling you if they don't get 8 wins this year, that means they're in trouble. I don't think you can look at this Giants team through that lens.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to see like an improved Daniel Jones. Obviously, he had a good rookie year, but most people expect. I remember Tony Romo said in an interview recently, most quarterbacks will make the leap from year 1 to year 2, or year 2 to year 3. But after that, it's kind of difficult to make that leap. But I am expecting some improvement from Jones, obviously with the fumbles. But you made a really good point about San Francisco. And it's not like they just came out of nowhere, because they were picking in the top 10 like so many years in a row. And I think Bosa, obviously, was the biggest impact guy that really just transformed their defense to be like a dominant unit. But yeah, you're right. There's so many good teams in the NFC. I feel like the NFC is better overall than the AFC. And I think even a team like Atlanta, a lot of people aren't talking about them, but in that division, one interesting fact I just remember about the Falcons is every single player on their offense is a former first-round pick, if you look at just their starting lineup, which I thought was just crazy because they do have so much talent, and I think Matt Ryan is very good. So somebody that actually I'm hoping Jones can emulate is Ryan, because he does remind me of him in some ways. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on my show so much. This has been so much fun. I'm really bad at ending these kinds of shows, so I was thinking I would let you have the last word. And you're on Sirius, and you're on the Giants Radio Network, and you're also on the podcast, because I listen to the Big Blue Kickoff as a podcast a lot of times, and then the Giants Huddle podcast I really enjoy with you, John Schmelk, Paul Dottino. I believe David Deal does it sometimes as well, and Jeff Fiegels as well. He's a regular. So it's really cool to be able to actually talk to you in person, because it's you feel like you know someone when you listen to them so much on a podcast, because you're just listening to, even though you're not taking part in the conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been so much fun. But yeah, I just wanted to give you the last word. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot like that, but I do appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Well, as I mentioned, David, my pleasure. Always enjoy talking football. Certainly appreciate you tuning in on a regular basis to the programs that I'm involved in. Certainly we both share the same passion in football as well as the Giants. So once again, more than happy to continue this conversation moving forward. I thank you. I thank your viewers for tuning in to our coverage of the New York Giants. And I'm looking forward to hopefully getting this season up and running. That was the one thing that we didn't talk about. I mean, the big thing is hopefully the coronavirus will cooperate and we'll get some football, because this seems like the never-ending offseason. As much as I enjoy breaking down the offseason moves and the outlook of the rookie class, I like to actually discuss and break down a game for once, David. So I'm hoping that the calendar and the current circumstances of the country cooperates, and we get these guys back on the field. We keep them healthy. We keep them safe, which I think is the number one priority. And maybe in a few weeks we'll actually be able to consume a football game. I think that's the most important thing right now that I'm anticipating and looking forward to. But once again, thanks so much for having me on the program. Enjoyed the conversation very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm so hopeful that we do have a football season, like you said. Yeah, and I would love to have this conversation again in the future. It's so much fun. And thank you guys. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. If you haven't done so, please give me a thumbs up and hit the bell icon. But I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for watching.